what's the one thing you love about Bennett and think of often about him and what he brought to the world?
Well, just besides he was just light embodied, and I always wondered what his life's mission would be, and I never realized that his life mission would be introducing me to mine.
Hello and welcome to the ReConnect Podcast, a weekly show sponsored by the Anasazi Foundation and powered by Story Studios. I'm Ganel-Lyn, your host. I'm so grateful you've joined us, where we have conversations to help you strengthen your most important relationships and reconnect with those that matter most. I am so thrilled today to be with my guest, Amanda Wilkinson. We did not plan to color coordinate, but we are feeling very joyful that we did. Because at the time of this taping, it is a gloomy day in Utah, and we were channeling some sunshine, I believe. So I'm so thrilled that you have the privilege of hearing from my friend and hearing of her experiences as we talk today. I love these conversations. They're not scripted, and I know that you're in for a treat today. Tell a little bit of yourself and your bio in a short little segment without disclosing all the juicies that are coming out. Where you come from, kind of the stage of life you're in, and then we'll give a little bit of a backstory for what we're talking about today.
Awesome. That's beautiful. So, grew up in Davis County.
Yes.
We're recording here in Davis County, and so this feels like home related to half of Davis County. For those of you that live in Davis County or that know people in Davis County. Have lived all over the country, went to school outside of Utah, schooling job opportunities took us all over, and eventually came back, and now we are settled in Utah County. I'm the mother of 5 children that range in age from 5 to almost 17, and I love the season of life that I'm in right now, but it is requiring different parts of me.
Yeah, and I think if you have families that have a range of age, I also, for our audience that know my backstory, I have a 21-year-old and a 15-year-old that there's a 6-year gap there, and people are always like, so that doesn't really work, and I always say, this is what God did.
We didn't plan it that way.
And you know what? They love each other so much, but not as much now because one's in college and out of the home. But I remember when they were both at home, and summer times especially, it was like, how do I meet the needs of this child who's a teen and this one who's still like wanting to go jump at the jump house, parks and stuff.
Absolutely.
So, and you've been married how long?
Been married for coming up on 18 years.
Okay, rock on, sister.
I know, it's amazing.
In this day and age, right?
And there are times I didn't know if it was going to...
No, really.
If we were going to make it, I'll be honest, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But sometimes when you have massive life experiences happen, marriage already takes a lot of effort anyways. It makes it even more complex.
Yeah, and I think I've been married 27 years, and I know that for us, I just was sharing this on a podcast for college that asked me this question about success and what advice, and I would say, I mapped it out, but most of what we're living is our plan B.
Or C, or D,
or
F.
Yeah, like 27 years ago, young Rob and Ganel-Lyn did not think we would be dealing with chronic illness, infertility, job loss, suicide, all of those things that really do shape a very deep love. But I call them wilderness experiences, and sometimes they're hard to brave. They are. So, well, that's a perfect segue into really why I wanted you to come on today. I think you are such a beautiful ambassador for the subject of grief. And I don't know a person on the planet that has not experienced grief. I've talked to people that have literally never lost someone really significantly close to them, and then they lose a pet. And then they're right in that grief. So, and I think grief can take on different forms. Yes. But it's not neat, tidy, in a package with a bow experience.
And it doesn't have a timeline.
Dang it, because I...
Check.
Yes, I would love to have a list and say I did all those stages that are on that blog I read on WebMD about grief. And I'll share some thoughts on my own journey through some grief, but why don't you share a little bit of what was the dynamics of your family, and when did grief come knocking or pounding on your door? What happened in your life that was your big teacher for this?
So we have known multiple types of grief, but probably the most life-changing grief that we've experienced happened when, at a time when, like so many, we least expect it. And I was the young mother of 4 children, and at the time my children ranged in age of 8.5 down to almost 2. Our baby was almost 2.
So you were in that very much, everyone got put in their beds safely at night.
Yes.
Which was...
Yes.
Gives you a false sense of something, I don't know, control or safety, right?
Yeah. And of course they're in their car seats.
Yes.
And of course you have like all of those
monitors.
Yes, and protectors in the electrical outlets and all the things that you do to keep your children safe.
And limit, I would like to say, control vulnerability in my life. I do a lot of control work because I realize that we do a lot to try to create a sense of there's no unexpected gonna pop around the corner in our lives. And then we get presented with a pop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it went from me just being a busy mother of 4 children and just trying to navigate that season of life of having them need me for everything. I was in that season, and we had just gotten through a life-threatening health situation with a daughter that she almost passed away, but we were miraculously able to save her, and through modern medicine and blessings and miracles and all those things. And so we were in this really sweet period of life.
A faith bubble, maybe? Would you call it that? Where you were like, oh, we just did that, and look at where
our prayers were answered, and we were able to learn that lesson, and we're able to value life more than ever, and we were able to come out on top, getting the answer that we wanted, and yet still having the lesson, which is that beautiful place to be.
I love that. That's when you can write a cute blog post, right? You're like, and this is what faith is, and
you
this
can
is
tie
how
the
you
beautiful
do
bow
it.
at
Yes,
the end.
yes. And if you pray this way, and then you patiently wait on God, He answers your prayer. So you would come through that.
We just come through that experience about 1.5 years before, and had come out on the other end just valuing each other, holding each other closer.
Because it does create connection. You know, the name of this podcast is ReConnect. And when you do brave something like that, it does create some connection. And did it put life in perspective? Like,
absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
You know, that's not such a big deal. And that's not such a big, because look, our daughter is healthy in here.
Yes. I remember just looking around the dinner table at my family and just crying because we spent 1.5 months in ICU in the hospital trying to save her life. And I was living at the Ronald McDonald House. My husband was in a graduate program. My other daughter was in ICU. Our other daughter, and I was 8 months pregnant, and my other daughter sometimes could go in ICU, sometimes couldn't. So I remember just being around the dinner table again,
grateful
for the first time, just so grateful that we're all here together.
Yeah.
Whether or not the dinner was great or whatever.
It's mac and cheese, but we're good.
But we're all here. And so we just come out of that experience. And then we had a night where, we had a day where everyone woke up, and my little guy was teething, and he was a little bit cranky. He was 19 months.
And what is his name?
His name's Bennett. And he is just this being of light and love, and just kind of enveloped everyone around him with his love. And so he woke up that morning or that morning feeling a little bit off, but he'd been teething and had kind of a low-grade fever. And so we decided to have everyone stay in their pajamas that day, and we just decided to have a family day.
Oh, I love those days.
I know. Just such a gift. And so we just played all day long, and we made smoothies, and I texted my husband when he was about ready to come home, and I said, honey, bring home pizza. We're just going to have a family night. And we played games, and we watched The Princess and the Frog, which had just come out. And then when he was starting to feel a little bit tired that night, while the rest of the family stayed downstairs and played games, I walked him upstairs, and I was singing his song. And he had just gotten to the point where when I would sing his song, the last few words, he would fill in with like the last words. So I would say, I love my Bennett, and then he would say, boy, and then he is my pride and joy. So he just that week was just able to the point to sing
mimic
his song
with
me. And I remember holding him in my arms, and as I walked up to his crib that night, I just remember I call them heartburst moments, and every mother knows what that is, where you always love your children, but there are these moments where your heart is just exploding with so much love you can't even contain it.
And I think those are little tender mercies from God to get us through the teenage years
Yes.
and some other times that
Yes.
may be challenging because they're teething or they're waking up all night. And I think it's just this shot in your heart that really grounds you in your love. That is the mother love, right?
And for me, I think it is times where God just gives us a feeling of what his love is for them. Like, this is it.
Yeah, it's like a peak.
This is it.
Like,
Yes.
this is what I feel for all of my children, and you're going to get to feel it for a moment.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that.
So I was having this heartburst moment, and as I was putting him in his crib and pulling up the blanket and just caressing him with kisses, he just waved his little hand at me and he said, "Mama, na-night. Na-night, Mama, na-night." And I kept waving at him and blowing him kisses. And I remember closing the door that night. And even after I closed the door, him saying, "Mama, na-night, na-night." And I just remember standing outside the door with my hand on the doorknob and just thinking, this is what heaven feels like. This is what heaven feels like. In this moment, I could not possibly love this child more than I love him right now. And that moment was the last time that I saw him alive. And the next morning, when we went in to get him, his other siblings were in that tab. And I was downstairs getting ready to leave for a regional women's meeting for our congregation. And I heard this blood-curdling scream upstairs from my husband. And he had gone in, and he was really still, and he went to touch his back to wake him up because he'd slept in a little bit. And when he turned him over, it was obvious that he had been gone for a while. And of course, at that point, we did everything that we could to revive him, including some kind of traumatic things. But by the time the paramedics came, they told us that he had been gone for about 4 or 5 hours. And so...
And, I think it's important for our listeners, if you have not been in a moment of grief that manifests that way, the blood-curdling scream, I also have experienced that when I write about it, when I knew I came down the stairs, the family was all asleep or in their rooms, and my stepdad who was visiting was coming in from the garage, and I could feel it. He had been in the garage talking to my brother, and he was coming in to tell me that my sister Meg had been found and had taken her life. And I did the same thing. And later on, it's almost slow motion, right? It's you put words on it after the fact. I remember my mom saying to me, "I've never heard that sound before."
It's a primal sound.
Oh.
It's almost like the closest thing that I can describe it as, it's kind of like when you're having a child and when it's time to bear down, you can't even control it. That is the sound that comes up out of your body.
Yes.
Especially in unexpected grief. Because I have experienced other grief before that I could see coming, and there was some preparation but especially when it's so jarring and no preparation for it, there is a primal sound that comes out of your body that even as it's coming out of you, I was having a moment like I didn't breathe, and I'm crawling up the stairs to try to get to my mom and my child to tell them what, right? And when your husband went in there, I can relate. I can relate to moments where my children would sleep so soundly that I would have that panic moment. And when you realized what was happening, and you went through that process, and then the first responders came. Take us through as much as you feel like sharing, because I know you've talked about this, that process with first responders isn't always great, right? And your family went through some secondary trauma after the loss of your child. Do you feel like sharing that a little bit? Absolutely, yes. This is something that I'm very open about because I think there needs to be a lot of
awareness.
Yes. But for us, immediately after they found our son, they immediately said, well, in 45 minutes, we're going to have we're going to have officials here and they're going to take him away in a body bag and there's all these things. And they immediately started circling our house with crime tape and started limiting my access to my son. And I immediately asked to see the person that was in charge of this. In our case, it was an investigator that was assigned to the case. Because our son was completely healthy, they actually opened up an investigation on our family.
Because it was such an unexpected death.
Yes, and there was
and
no
he was
obvious
past
sign.
the original thought on SIDS, right? That window had
He was
closed.
almost 2.
Yeah.
He was almost 2.
So they weren't thinking that either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And shortly before he passed away, there was an incredibly heartbreaking experience that happened in our county where a little boy had been beaten to death by his mother and her boyfriend. So I think the whole county
was on edge.
Yeah. And maybe hyper vigilant, which is still a tender point to me when I see people that do that to their children, because I think not only is that incomprehensible for that child, but because of your actions, there are innocent people that are put through hell because of precautions that our officials have to take, just in case there's that option there.
It's a change within our society that is unfortunate, right?
It is.
And I think if you study the Bible or other scripture, there's a warning about what happens to our hearts.
Yes.
At this point, I think we're seeing that play out, where there's almost this constant stream of negative news, and we can become so numb and cold to it, which is why I value platforms like this where we can make it more personal. Because you see a 3-minute, I've done enough media that I'm always edited wrong, and it's always edited down.
Yes.
And so tonight, if you're watching the news and you see a story and you think you know the backstory, be very careful, because there's always a human element that you don't see, that can't be in that media package and had to be edited out, and you don't know the backstory. So from that going forward, your family, what was the funeral process like, and then what were the first signs that this grief was not going to go away? Because I think oftentimes we rally around a loved one or a friend during the funeral, and then everyone goes back to some kind of normal, and it's not normal for the family.
Absolutely. And something that I want to emphasize that kind of goes into the rest of the story is that after they told us that there was nothing that they could do for our child, and we ended up working out with the investigator a more healing scenario of how to bring our children back in and how to have them see their brother and to tell them what had happened.
You did do that.
Because I negotiated with the investigator that now we understood there was nothing that we could do to save our son, but the way that we handled this was absolutely crucial to our healing going forward as a family. Because all of my children
How did you have the state of mind, Amanda, to do that?
I look back and I seriously feel like I was being buoyed up.
Yes.
And that I was being instructed.
Angels
in how
were
to
nearby.
Yes, and some of those things, some of those people that were there from another realm, I can identify by name, and many more I cannot. But there were some specific instructions given to me at a time where I was not in a place.
You were in
to do that.
Total trauma.
And I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness,
how did I do that?
But there are connections that we have. Beyond this earth that helped us walk through that.
Yes.
But I remember my husband, I was very calm on the phone, and I was on the phone with the 911 operator. She was walking us through some things. But after they told us that there was nothing that we could do, my husband was slumped against the crib, and he was
heaving, sigh.
Just inconsolable. And I remember holding my son and wrapping him in a blanket because he felt very cold, which bodies
don't understand.
happen. He was very stiff and very cold. And as a mother, you want your child to be warm. So I wrapped him up. And I remember going and sitting with David on the side of the crib, holding our lifeless son. And out of nowhere, I made him promise me that we would not let this event destroy our marriage, our family, or our faith. Now, the reason why I emphasize that is that at that moment, where that came from
was divine.
But I had no idea what that would mean in the years to come.
So it anchored you before you needed the journey through the wilderness.
And before we knew what was coming.
Yeah, which is
How?
what we really want to talk about
Yes.
too. Because I think oftentimes we talk about grief in this very generalized term, and there are enough articles out there and doctors and therapists that will say you need to go through these stages. And it is a mess.
Yes.
It is a mess. It's not in order. It's not on a timeline. And it's not the same for everyone in the family. So you had the presence of mind in that moment.
Yeah.
And in a very, like, I would say, a providential way, you prophesied this is where we're not going to go. We're going to stay anchored as a family here, no matter what comes. And then what did the next few months feel like?
So, you're just in shock for so long, but for so many families that I've worked with in grief, including our own, most people don't start to hit rock bottom until about 3 to 6 months out.
Okay, that's really important, you guys,
Yeah.
because any of my friends or loved ones that go through a loss, I always write a card or have a conversation or a text that says, I'm your friend in 3 months.
Yes.
And this is why. Because for the next 6 weeks, likely, there's going to be a flurry of support. And then you hit a space where I remember going through the grocery store saying, I wanted to grab the speaker mic and say, nothing is the same. Why are you all acting like everything is normal? Do you know who isn't on the earth anymore?
Yes.
And did you have those feelings of why is everyone going back to normal? Or when was it obvious that you were in your rock bottom?
My mental health started being affected.
In what way?
I started to have deal with the effects of PTSD and acute anxiety. And for me, acute anxiety looks like a grand mal seizure and almost going unconscious.
Yes. So you're clear you're in that anxiety. What does PTSD look like? Because that's a term we use all the time, and people don't really understand unless they've experienced what that means. What were your triggers?
So for me, there were certain things that I subconsciously connected to what happened that day. And for me, one of those sounds was the sound of sirens. Because when I was trying to do everything I could to bring my child back to life, I was hearing sirens come towards my house.
So it anchored in your soul, this connection.
Yes. And so whenever I would be hearing sirens, like when you're just driving on the street and sirens would be coming down and everyone peacefully goes towards the side, then all of a sudden I'm going into this massive panic attack where I'm convulsing because I'm going back to ground zero moment.
And you're trying to still be a parent.
Yes.
You still have other children that you have to wake up every day, get out of bed. Did your anxiety and PTSD ever make you not be able to get out of bed, shower, do those basic things?
There were days, absolutely.
There were days.
But that said, I have so much compassion for mothers who lose their only child. Because for me...
It's life-saving when you have another human you're responsible for.
And I didn't lose my identity as a mother. I work with other mothers who, when they lose their only child, suddenly not only are they grieving that loss, but then they don't know where they fit.
Yes.
They don't know whether to stand up on Mother's Day when they say mothers, all stand up, like in church. They don't know their friends that have children no longer invite them to play dates because they don't want to trigger them. But then what group do they hang out with?
Very
Important. That was not something that was part of my path, but something that I greatly realized that for me, the thing that I started to deal with going forward was mental health issues. My children started to have mental health issues based on that trauma that happened. And then based on my husband's prior life experiences. We know that men and women deal with things differently.
That's what I was just going to ask you is you were having these. What was manifesting for him at the time?
So my husband grew up in a very traumatic environment.
So this PTSD was old but new, right?
And he was viewing the loss, even though we all dealt with the same loss, we all see the loss through our own lens.
Yes, so
right?
important.
And so
that's why when someone's grieving, be careful. I think we sometimes hesitate to do anything because we don't know what to say, but ask the person, how is this showing up for you right now? Where are you at right now? Because we do a lot of guessing with each other. And your husband was bringing up a whole different trauma story in his mind.
And I also think for men, they, as providers and as leaders
protectors
of home, yes, they want to make everything right and they want to fix things. And all of a sudden they see this massive gaping hole in all the suffering. and they can't do anything about it and they can't fix it. And sometimes that makes them retreat anymore or even more. And in our society, oftentimes, especially with our males, we don't give them the language or permission or the processes to process grief and loss and trauma.
My father-in-law died of MS and he's been gone over 12 years. And the other day we were in a movie where there's a man in a wheelchair, and I knew, and I squeezed my husband's hand. I said, "Your daddy?" And he said, "Yep," because he had lifted him out of the wheelchair that way. He had wiped his face that way. He had to do the catheter stuff and all the feedings, and I just think it's another reminder to me that, especially for men, I don't know how you were, but when I was going through grief, I wanted to get through it. And men want to kind of get back to normal. And so then it trickles out almost slowly for a long time.
And men have the ability to compartmentalize.
Which is a gift, right? If you're partnering with a male and you're a female, there's a gift to that, and it's a hindrance to a connection maybe. Did you struggle that your husband was processing it in a very different way or compartmentalizing, and you were maybe home with the kids kind of in the space all the time? Was that part of it?
So my son's funeral was on a Friday, and then we had a family day on Saturday, and then I was like, on Sunday, I'm like, well, surely you're going to stay home this week. And he said, honey, I have to get back to work. He said, this house is full of so many triggers for me that I need to get back to something that was normal. And I remember when he said that, understanding why he said that, because I was experiencing that. But I remember in that moment too, being so angry
and resentful that you couldn't escape.
Here I was. And it was even more of a trigger for me because every moment of my day included Bennett. Every single moment of my day included that. And that home, every part of
there was a reminder everywhere.
Every single place. I was still pulling his socks and his toys out from underneath the couch. And I was still getting, we still had the outfit that he wore the night that he passed away that had green smoothie all over it right by the washer and dryer. And just so many different things.
And his crib, and his room, and his
everything. And that I felt like I was left to process by
alone.
Myself. And so there were so many things that happened, and then let alone help my children each process their own grief. And something that I want to pass on that I did not understand until we went through what we went through is that before this happened, I would have assumed that adults go through a full experience of grief, and that children go through a minor version. Like a pediatric version of grief.
Okay, so like the baby version.
Right. And I have found that is not the case at all.
And we don't always give children then permission and words around that experience either, because in many cases they are resilient. They fall, bust open their knee, and then they're doing pretty good an hour later, and we have this perception that they're boomeranging back just fine. What did you start to see within your marriage and family dynamics that created maybe a disconnection or that fracture that you had been warned of that first night? What was starting to happen in your communication? What were the signals if you were a nurse to walk into the situation and go, okay, these kids are struggling in this way and this marriage is struggling in this way? What did you see?
My husband didn't know how to put feelings to what he was feeling, and so he shut it down. And so he was emotionally shut down. My children didn't know how to put words to the immense, overwhelming emotions that they were experiencing, so they started to exhibit physical symptoms. And my 3-year-old, who was inseparable with his brother, that didn't know life without his brother, started to physically digress. And he was potty trained, and all of a sudden he went back to diapers, and all of a sudden he started having all these stomach issues, which, based on what I know now and the mental wellness movement I'm leading right now, there's a very direct correlation to the gut and the gut-brain axis and trauma and mental health. And so now that makes sense. At the time, I didn't understand that correlation. But I also...
Because, let me pause here for a minute. I feel to say to the listeners, we're all doing the best we can in the moment that we're living. And I think you have so much wisdom, clarity. You have words around what was showing up in this fracture in your marriage or this disconnect and these struggles with your children. But when you're living it, you're doing the best you can. And hopefully all of us are gaining knowledge every day. So hopefully next week I'm smarter than I am this week. And so if I judge what I lived this week based on what I learned next week, there's always going to be a disconnect. So kudos for you for seeing some of these patterns now. But I think when we're living them, and then later when we see them, we can almost have a secondary trauma of beating ourselves up because sometimes then the secondary stuff is playing out for a long time, and there's guilt that comes from that, as if like we had a handbook on what to do when our 19-month-old is found gone the next morning. What are 1 or 2 steps of reconnection that you would share that were maybe that first stage, and then maybe where you're at before we lose time? Because I value that you have put words on the reality of what grief is and how it manifests, because I think we say it in such general terms that there's a disconnect of what it really feels to feel it and live it. And anything you want to say about what were those first steps you took on reconnecting?
So I think there's 2 things that have made all the difference. In the early days, because my children were not at a space or at the ages where they could really fully
verbalize.
And as an adult, it was hard for me to put words onto what happened. But we created, and once again, just this download that I'm sure that was from heaven, based on the ages of my children, we had 2 beautiful individuals volunteer to take some of Bennett's dearest clothes, most cherished clothes, and to make healing quilts. And we had 2 healing quilts that were made, which I couldn't give his clothes away, but it was also hard for me to keep a closet full of his clothes there.
It was a moving forward but retaining.
Yes, and I didn't want to cut them up.
Yeah.
But if I could see it in a beautiful work, then it was healing for me.
What a precious gift.
Yes, but when we received those healing quilts, we determined a language in our family, and that is that we would have this big, beautiful basket in the family room. And if my children were feeling especially sad or vulnerable, or that they needed some love and attention, they would go and grab a quilt and wrap themselves around them. And that would be me or my husband's clue that I'm sad.
Do you feel like that's a gift from Bennett? Like
I do.
that Bennett,
I do.
I feel him here now, but
Yes.
I think what a gift he is to the family, to still be a watch caregiver and a brother to them. Because it's his clothes that are the signal. And so there gets to be a conversation that probably should be happening in all of our families, even without grief, right? Or a loss that way.
But for all families, what is your signal?
What's your signal?
Is it a keyword?
Oh, I love that.
Is it an
Amanda.
object? Is it an action? Which, when I can't put words to what I'm feeling, what does this help?
Yes.
I'm drowning.
So one if you don't have something, one that we use in our family now is I literally just say, I'm feeling really vulnerable right now.
Yeah.
And I'm acting like a crazy woman because I'm feeling vulnerable, right? And so I think the other one that's super helpful is when someone is not acting their best, generous assumptions in a family that's coming from a place.
Just give them grace.
And to say, can we circle back? I use that word a lot on this podcast. Can we circle back and say what's really going on here? I love that. What was the second thing that you would really share as a connection?
So I didn't see it as a blessing then. It has become an incredible blessing.
Don't you love
since
that?
then. I mean,
do not see it as a blessing.
Yeah, but at that time we had, at a very young age for our children, from 8.5 on down, to talk about the unexpected heartaches of life, but how God's grace gives us the power to do things that, and I hate the quote that you hear oftentimes in church, that God will never give you more than you can bear, because
Wrong.
I believe that's the whole test of life.
Yes.
The whole point of what we experience is far more than our skill set,
a stretching experience,
far more than our knowledge, but that with Him,
and His grace.
Yes. We can do that. And so we, at very young ages, had the opportunity to teach our children tools and skills, but also, more than anything, resiliency.
Right.
And as I'm working now in the mental wellness arena, I am realizing that is what this generation is missing. When hard things happen, these kids
A
don't have
tendency
the
to just
tools.
shut down.
Yes. And they don't know what to do, and they don't think that they can handle it. And so we're having so many more suicides. They're like, I've hit this rough patch. It's never going to get better. I'm out.
And there's a lot of resources out there. Anasazi, which is our
Yes.
sponsor, has
Absolutely.
a great wilderness experience that really
Yes.
does teach that process of putting your teens out into some situations that stretch them. And then where does the confidence come from?
Yes.
They see themselves successfully navigating a messy situation. So
Yes.
you're saying your children were almost immunized.
Yes, and we didn't. Well, I mean, I guess we did have the option to not teach them that, but out
You
of
could have
survival,
totally ignored
yes,
it.
but out of survival, we started to teach them mental health tools. And emotional intelligence tools. Intelligence tools at really young ages, which since then, sometimes when you experience something really hard, you're like, okay, I've experienced like the hardest thing, so now the rest of my life is going to be smooth sailing.
Listen, you know what? I'm going to totally validate you because for those familiar with my backstory, the last 5-6 years have been the most intense. I mean, it was back-to-back Lifetime movies, okay?
Yeah.
But then there's days I'm having a meltdown on we have to get new tires? Why do I have to get new tires? Like, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? So you gave your children this permission to say, we're going to build a toolbox around emotion and mental issues that are going to
and how to process difficult things.
Yeah.
Which since then, there's been additional hard things that have happened.
That they've had to pull those tools out and use them again.
Yeah, my one daughter that's 14 was severely electrocuted last fall.
I
has
remember
had
that.
Severe issues that have been absolutely paralyzing for her in many ways. And we have been able to go back to this tool belt, and because of what she's learned from being critically ill before, from losing her brother.
Same
daughter.
Man,
which brings additional trauma.
She's got
right?
a mission on earth, that one, doesn't she?
And she has a lot of a mission around, she's a singer-songwriter, and she's very interested in therapy and healing based on what she has
Which
been
I think
through.
is also a really important part
Closer for her
to
mission.
understand is that a whole family may be going through an experience, but the takeaway for each individual, it can be, for I believe in my belief system, for a greater good, if we allow that to happen. And we want as parents to shield our children from trauma. No parent is like, yeah, I think instead of summer camp or soccer camp, I think we're going to go through trauma camp.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be equipped to do your big mission and help in the future. We're running low on time, but can you share a little bit of then what did you do to connect in your marriage, and where people can find you now, and where your takeaway has taken you right now?
Yes. So what I did to connect in our marriage, that is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Because what worked for us a little
It's
while
not in
ago,
Hollywood on
right,
the screen, by way.
is different than it does now. And
Yeah.
that is a continuing process that we have not hesitated to go out for additional help when needed.
Therapy is a great tool in the toolbox.
Yes, absolutely. And also, I also feel like that experiences like this help us to have a more raw communication that I would not have been prepared to have.
It's not a gift. It strips
few
away
years.
the surface. You just have to do it for survival.
Absolutely. Which is scary at first
Right.
because you're voicing things that
So
you're like,
vulnerable.
this could make or break our relationship. And yet you realize that there is no other option.
You can't afford
to do this.
You can't afford to skirt around anything.
Absolutely. So I would say having incredibly open communication.
Was that okay for your husband?
Oh,
who
no.
was shy?
No. Nuh-uh.
I was like, wait, are you married to the one man that really
Yeah.
wanted to do
No, and to this day, it is something that brings him into a very vulnerable place.
Right.
Because based on his background, having discussions like that meant the end of a family, the end of a marriage. So he has had to redefine, no, we are fighting for this because this matters.
So in many, many, many ways, I'm hearing you say Bennett was the source of healing and continues to be.
Yes.
Because he came as the great teacher, and his loss has allowed your husband to circle back, your children to be equipped, so they in the future can keep circling back to this like anchor experience. Where has that taken you in the work that you've done? Because there's so many wonderful things we could say about what you're doing now. But what's on your heart, and how can people find you? What are you doing with that experience and you continue to do to kind of, I believe, bless the world? Like, we can either hide in a cave with our pain, or we can take our pain out as a gift, and others will go, oh, me too. And then they're able to go forward.
Absolutely. So my background is in global advocacy, and I've been working at the United Nations this year for 20 years. And what came out of that is my desire to make a difference in the world. But where that has gone since my son passed away is realizing the massive need that we have for mental wellness support. And so many of us were introduced to mental health issues from trauma.
From trauma, yes.
And so my focus is really in giving families and individuals tools that have dealt with traumatic events and are dealing with mental health issues. And then I also am a co-founder of an interfaith conference.
I got to give a high five because we both share a passion for interfaith work because we are faith women.
Yes.
But we love, value, and encourage faith of all kinds. And that's why this podcast will always have a faith element. Mm-hmm. It will always be very inclusive of beliefs. There's power in our collective faith. And I know that you have created some amazing events, but where can people find you on social media or other ways so they can maybe have a further conversation about your tools that you have found that are helpful with mental health and also maybe connect with you on the interfaith level?
Yeah, so our conference is the You Got This Women's Interfaith Conference.
You got this.
You got this.
You got this.
And our next event, I don't know when this will air, will be March 23rd in Salt Lake City.
But you'll also have a fall event, right?
Yes, we have a reboot event in the fall, but our web address is www.yougotThisWoman. You can find out about our interfaith conferences there. Also, additionally, because of my background and my mental wellness work, we will always focus on how, in the faith conversation, how to navigate mental wellness, because there's additional stigma and even shame in faith communities around mental health issues. And so we're trying to change the conversation around how we deal with mental health issues and support in our faith communities.
Instead of saying it's an either or, that I have come to know through my own journey, and I've sat on some panel discussions for faith leaders on depression, suicide, and anxiety, that we do need to have a different conversation and realize it's an and. You can have faith and trauma. You can have faith and deal with mental health issues. And there's hope. Yes. And there's tools beyond. I believe all good things come from God. Mm-hmm. So that's not always just reading your scripture or having your kind of prayer, but it is being guided to the right therapist or any other tools that you find super helpful, which there's long lists of them, and I know that you and I share a passion on some of those. Mm-hmm. So I love that you have taken this loss. And what's the one thing you love about Bennett and think of often about him and what he brought to the world?
Well, just besides he was just light embodied, and I always wondered what his life's mission would be, and I never realized that his life mission would be introducing me to mine.
I love it. Thank you, Bennett. Mm-hmm. Thank you for teaching us and continuing to teach us. And thank you, Amanda, for being vulnerable with us and honest about how messy it is. I want to echo that as well. I remember a few years after Meg's death, I was in the shower and had a total meltdown and thought, wait, this isn't the time. There's nothing going on. Why is this the trigger? And then just recently shopping, I had another one, and I talk about her all the time, and I don't melt down. And so if you are in the middle of your own grief story, your own grief wilderness experience, I hope something that we've shared today will, one, validate that, inspire you to find the gifts and the blessings that will come even if you don't see them now, because it is a great teacher. It is a great teacher. It tends to remove the extra fluff of our lives and expose our pain that needs to still be healed. And so I want to send prayers and love to those that may be listening that are in that grief, that messy part, and it feels very lonely at times. There is hope and there is healing, and you will be that source for others in the future. Thank you for joining us today on the ReConnect Podcast. I'm Ganel-Lyn, and I'm so glad you've been with us today.
Thank you for listening to the ReConnect Podcast, presented by Anasazi Foundation. Are you worried about your teenager? Are they struggling with depression, low self-esteem, anger, drugs, or suicidal thoughts and feelings? If so, Anasazi Foundation can help. Anasazi is a wilderness therapy program for at-risk youth, and our mission is to help turn hearts homeward. To learn more about us, please visit anasazi.org. If you liked this show, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Thank you again.